I wanted to start by just welcoming you all this afternoon. I feel a real sense of the stewardship of this thing that God gave to us. And we want to do our time together in a way that is really honoring to the lives of the missionaries and the sacredness of their stories and what they've shared. But that was the thing that always struck us in this process. It was like, this is not rows on a spreadsheet. These are stories. They're lives. This is the real narrative of the offering and the receiving of lives lived out in ministry that are in very much the already not yet kingdom of God. So we also feel like there is so much in this data that we also want to be an encouragement to you. That we don't want to err on the side of being digestible, to err on the side of being actionable, and try to, instead of fire the whole lot. We're going to try to do that as well. And we really want to do this in a way that is very much collaborative, it's conversational. We have a great deal to learn from one another. And we want to think about what does resiliency mean for us and for our missionaries, for the people that we support and care for. So that's the hope for the day. And unless the Lord shows up, we've bitten off way more than we can chew. So let's pray and invite God to be with us. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Christ our God, we thank you that you are the resilient God. We thank you that we are your beloved. We thank you that you, out of your love, invite us to be a part of your mission in this world and to care for those who are engaged in your mission in this world. Lord, resiliency is a mystery. So we ask that you would be with us today. That you would lead us deeper into understanding you and your work in the world, and that you would be glorified today. We pray these things in your name, that you love us. In the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. So my name is Geoff Whiteman. This is my wife, Kriss, and we have been at Asbury Seminary for probably 10 years now. Been working in missionary care for about 5 or so. And I got interested in resiliency a couple of years ago, doing some work in the jail as part of my practice. And I wanted to do a bit of a study on it. And so it ended up taking off. And yesterday what we did was framed up this model. And that came out of the literature. And now today what we'll do is we'll go into the results of that. Okay. So we wanted to frame up this the way that we think about resiliency. We wanted to reflect a little bit about that theologically and make this really important point that the resiliency that we need and have in ministry is not a resiliency that we find within ourselves. That it is, in fact, Jesus Christ who's the resilient one. Specifically in his resurrection from the dead. But that is the act of resilience. And that we participate in his mission in the world, we partake of his life, and we receive his resilience. All right, so what we did was we wanted to find out from missionaries how they had become resilient. We felt there's something to be gleaned from all of the research in resiliency, but there's something important about talking to missionaries specifically and talk about their service. Now, so I was doing this for THM, and I thought, man, wouldn't it be great if we did the survey, we got 100 responses, talked to a dozen people, And that would be a really nice article. And so that's what we were aiming for. And we launched this September 2017. And by February 2018, we had like over 1,000 responses. We were like prepared to do 1,000 interviews. Like 500 people who were asked to participate. What are we going to do? So we switched to a written interview model. We'll talk a little bit more about it in the second half. And we ended with 245 responses to that. And it was just, it was overwhelming. It was overwhelming in the sheer amount of data. It was overwhelming. I remember one day, this is my pro tip for you, don't quantify how much data you have when you're overwhelmed by it. So that's a good thing not to do. I like one of my calculators. This spreadsheet is really sluggish. You know, okay, how many rows are there? How many columns are there? Let's do a little math. 94,000 cells. What? You know, we had a written interview, and it's like the mean time on that was like 47 minutes. It was unbelievable. I would expect someone to spend 10 minutes, 15 minutes, but they like just pour their hearts out. So I was like, man, if I printed this, how many sheets of paper would it be? It's like 645 sheets of paper. It's like a Russian novel. Raw data. It would take it literally would take 5 weeks full time to write all that. So that was how this research happened. Yeah.
So today we're going to overview the research and talk about how we did what we did, so that you can hear, oh, this is where these numbers can't come from and these statistics come from we're talking about. Secondly, we found one thing in the demographics that really stuck out as actually statistically significant, so we'll talk about that. The next thing that we'll do is look at, we discovered that resiliency is not a binary, right? It's not that either you're resilient or you're not resilient. It's that there are gradations. And so we took that and did some work to figure out kind of 5 categories or 5 places along the spectrum that people tend to fall. So we'll talk about those personas. And then we will talk through the piece of this that comes the most from the interview portion of the survey was these 3 nurturing relationships that missionaries themselves reported as helping them to become more resilient. So that'll be more in the second half of what we do. Our goal, as Geoff said, is that this would be digestible. We're going to do some small group work. We're going to do some larger group discussions because we really want to be in a position where we're all learning from each other today. If you walk out of here knowing a lot of things about missionary resilience but don't have any ideas how that affects what you do, we haven't done our job. So our goal is that there would be practical application of this. And our goal is that you would have at least one resource, one idea that will let you increase your own resiliency or that will help you help others increase their resilience.
Do a bit of an orientation. If you have questions along the way, please feel free to ask them. So what we did was we first started with just a short survey that gathered some demographic and psychographic data. And so that would be things like, what year were you born? What was the first year that you worked as a missionary? What was the last year that you worked as a missionary? And so like those 3 numbers let us know how old somebody is. They let us know how old they were when they began working as a missionary. They let us know how old they were when they retired. Those 3 numbers give us a lot of data. We also asked some psychographic things like, what are your top supports? What are your top stressors? So we had a question that ended up being wonderful was, is there anything else about yourself or your experience as a missionary that you'd like to share? And it was just neutral, open-ended, and wow, that was great. And then what we did is we have a psychographic and demographic data, and we were able to administer the CD risk, which is a pretty standard resiliency scale. It's been used in about 500 publications. It's been used in previous missionary research. And then we were able to do the statistical analysis, right? Now, the thing that I am excited about, and part of why I chose to use CD Risk, was that it has 77 official translations. And that it would be possible for some people to replicate this study in some other languages. And we could have a proper global sample. And so that's the dream. So the second phase was to do semi-structured interviews. We wanted to actually talk to people, hear their stories. That wasn't possible. So instead what we did was try to create as close as the experience of, hey, I want to hear your story. Tell me your story, as we could. And so we made some videos, and has just some like blocks where people wrote in, answered some questions. We'll talk in depth about that after. So we did it's called Snowball session. We had participants refer participants to the study. Part of the reason we chose to do that is I think a lot of us would not say, yeah, I'm a resilient missionary. I should take your study. But if somebody else said to me, yeah, I think they're a resilient missionary, I think I'd be more receptive. So we did a snowball method. So that does skew the numbers, right? Skew the data a bit. But I think it's also part of why we got the participation that we did. So we had a little over 1,000 participants. We had some people who were incomplete or ineligible. There were about 152 of them. We removed those by who took the survey. And she was like, we removed people who were like protected classes so that we could like expedite the IRB. And so we removed people so you couldn't be incarcerated, you couldn't be a minor, you couldn't be pregnant. So I knew she wasn't a minor, and I was pretty sure she wasn't incarcerated. It's like, oh, she's pregnant. But I can't tell Chris because it's confidential.
She'd already told me it was fine.
Okay, yeah. So I think you were like the doula for that birth.
I was.
Yeah, cool. And the World Christianity Center out of Gordon Concord, they have a database, and they estimate that there are 400,000 missionaries in the world. And so those are the numbers that we're making reference to. Now, so if this sample had been randomly collected, it would represent a 99% confidence level with a plus or minus 4.31% error. It was not randomly collected, so it's not, but I think it's...
All that to say, this is a significant number.
So we did it with all this data, and gratefully, the Kern Family Foundation funds the Office of Faith, Work, and Economics at Asbury Seminary, and they graciously gave us a competitive grant. And that allowed us to pull together a team. And a year ago, that's when this happened. So Chris was preparing to take her qualifying exams, which is you read 80 books over 6 months. It's not a joke. And she like had a research assistant who quit, and she like volunteered, helped out. It was amazing. It was one of those things like it was a huge blessing, and it was one of those things that reshaped our life in a lot of ways. So thank you.
Thank God.
Yeah, very thankful for that. And Curtis put me in touch with Emily, and she was like this. She's like the statistician on this. I'm not a statistician. But she is, and she does amazing statistical work with this. Chris and Anna did a ton of the coding, and we used SPSS to do the statistical analysis and Atlas TI. That was it.
How many different organizations were represented?
Yes. One of the things we chose not to do was ask people what organization they were from. I think that we got a more honest response that way. We did ask people about the size of the organization, and that's what we'll get into in just a second, is like the demographic. We had missionaries from 41 countries, like nationalities, so the UN divides the world into 21 sub-regions. Might be 22, maybe 21. And so we have representation from missionaries in 17 of those sub-regions, which means that of all of the kind of like areas of the world that send missionaries, 99% of them come from the places where the participants in this project came from. That doesn't mean that it's like a representative sample, right? But it does mean that it's a global sample. You can see that North America was it's probably the largest group, followed by Northern Europe, and followed by Australia and New Zealand. And then where they went to was 148 countries, representing 21 UN subregions. The most predominant were East Africa, Southeast Asia, South America, Central America, East Asia, South Asia, Western Africa, and Western Europe. And again, we had where missionaries go in the world based on that 400,000 number. 99% of them go to places represented here. We had over half of them had been missionaries for more than 10 years, which I honestly was just overwhelmed by. I always feel like someone's been a missionary for 10 years. I'm like, that's a word. You know, done your time. And over half of them have been missionaries for more than 10 years. 27% of them have been missionaries for more than 20 years. We had one guy that had been missionary for 58 years. Yeah. In terms of the generation, we had a nice proportion of millennials, 27% millennials. 41% were Generation X, and 31% were baby boomers. And we even had a few for the silent generation. So we had a good representation there in terms of the generation health. Marital status was, what is the silent generation? Yeah. Silent generation was born before 1945.
Okay, before.
Yep. Yeah. Those come from, I think the Pew Institute is I use how they divided the generation. Okay. Questions or other comments? So in terms of the ministry contacts, the vast majority of them were working in training or education, in social community work, supporting the local or national churches, support of mission, evangelism to unreached, church planning. And we gave people an opportunity to write in what they did for the ministry function. And we had a lot of people write in healthcare, medical. One thing I thought was amazing that made the list here was like people who talked about like worship, prayer, or creative arts as their ministry function. And that was interesting, to see that. We asked about the agency side. You can see that about 7% were working independently, just working on their own. And then it spreads out pretty evenly between micro agencies, which would be like agencies with less than 24 missionaries. And then small agencies would be like 25 to 100 missionaries. Mid-sized agencies would be 100 to 500. Large would be 500 to 1,000. And mega would be over 1,000. So that's the rest of the agencies. I was curious about being part of a large agency or a small agency, how that might affect some of these experiences. Denominations, we had basically every major branch of Christianity was represented. So we had some Catholics and Orthodox. We had a lot of non-denominational, some Baptists, Methodists. A good spread. So, all right. Any thoughts, questions? I found this pretty interesting. I think to think about is just the mean start and retirement age. And so the mean start age was 30, with a standard deviation of 8.4, which means so 23 to 30 is when the vast majority of people start. And then the retirement age is 41 with a standard deviation of 12. So the vast majority of people retired. You know, in their like late 20s to like 40, 50. And I think that's something for us to think about. You know, what's happening in people's lives in their 20s that make being a missionary something that's what they can do. And what's happening in people's lives in their 40s that make mission something that's difficult for them to do. Yeah, should we expect missionaries to just go and spend their lifetime? Is that a realistic expectation for us to hold on to? What are the needs of people's families that we need to address? What's happening in a person's life that makes missions a possibility? Where they're not settled, they're not confident. So, things to think about. Yeah. I asked them when was the last year that you worked with them.
Okay.
Yeah.
So not everybody was an active missionary?
Correct.
What, you're going to get to what percentage were active?
No, not of this workshop. So I don't remember the number of what percentage had retired.
I could have been retired. You allowed the retirees to move up to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Any questions? So let's have a conversation. What demographic data do you think might have been significant? So we collected all this data, and then we compared it to the standard resiliency scale.
How long?
Yeah, I was like, of course, how long someone's been a missionary? Definitely been. Yeah, absolutely. I was banking on that. Yeah, what else? Yeah, so that is that's actually a pretty normal representation for missions. The joke is that you have all the married missionaries and all the single women, and that's 100% missionaries, right? And that's who they, yeah. Yeah, so that number is in line with other stuff.
Most of you are
Correct.
where they came from in the U.S., like what impact they were
Mm-hmm.
would probably affect.
Yeah, I wanted to give I mean, it's one of those, I'm like, someone's not going to do more than 10 minutes on this. So what's the most data I can collect in 10 minutes? But I did want to look at some of that. So, yeah.
The type of industry?
Yeah, you would think that like what people do, would impact the resiliency. Where they serve, absolutely.
Location. Or
Yeah, absolutely. You'd expect all that. Yeah. Yes.
whether they've been on a short-term mission trip before.
Yeah, what has their past experience been? Yeah. I didn't collect that data. But yeah, that would be really interesting. The thing that I was expecting was like to have like the number one impact was like length of service. I was absolutely sure of that. And it was not. Yeah, I walked around with that look on my face for about 3 months. What? How is the thing that was that most older people were, the more likely they were to score higher the CD risk scale. The CD risk scale is there's a 25, 10, and 2 item version. I use the 25 item, and the higher you score on that CD risk scale, the higher your resiliency level is. So the older people were, the more likely they were. It doesn't mean the older they were, the more resilient they were. It's just they were more likely to score higher.
You know, they based on surveys.
I don't get this at all. My own the thing that sort of resolved it for me, the thing I thought, yeah, this makes sense, is that guy who served on the mission field for 58 years, he had the seeds of that in him day one. And I think also that resiliency is not something that we start to develop the day we arrive in the field. It's probably something we start to develop the day we're born. Probably even still while we're in our mother's womb. And that seemed to me to be a way to make sense of it. That would be a really good second level of analysis to do, would be to look at the people who were presently working as missionaries and to see if that was out in that kind of second level.
Yeah, for that absence may affect the people.
Yeah, and maybe the people who are older are retired and doing. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. So, thank you for that. I had not thought about that as a possibility.
Could it be a difference in the generational way of how we commit ourselves to things and how long we're involved in a mission or in an organization or in a church? So I'm just wondering if this particular aspect may have nothing to do with resilience, but have to do with generational issues.
So the CD risk is scale. I think it's important in this conversation to say that this is how somebody scored on this scale, which is not necessarily quantifying their resiliency. But I do think there certainly are obviously generational differences at play, for sure. Yeah, for sure. Which deeply impact missions and mission organizations. Another factor is not as significant statistically, but was people who reported having multiple ministry roles, of which I think 75% of people, I forget the number, but it was a lot of people said, yeah, I do one thing in the mission field, I do a lot of things. And they tended to score higher. So that was an interesting finding as well. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Geoff already talked a little bit about what is demographic data, and psychographics get into some kind of deeper information about people. And what we did is there are 4 main areas that we looked at with psychographics. So one is what stressors do people report, one is their supports, and one is their desired resources. And then the final thing was that open-ended question. Something that is interesting about the stressors aspect of this, in 2004, Bosch did a study actually of, I think she called them stressors and refreshers. And so rather than reinventing the wheel when it came time to ask people about their most important stressors and their most important supports, we modified that list. We also wanted to see, are there changes in that between 2004 and 2017-18 when this was administered? And so what you can see on this chart is there were in fact some changes. Some of the things that, so for example, in Bosch's research, which is in the green, in 2004, financial pressure was the #1 stressor for missionaries. In our research, conflict with coworkers is the #1 stressor. Support from immediate families, so wife, husband, children, support from coworkers, and friendship with national people. All 3 of those were the main supports for Bosch, and that was the main supports in our research. The stressors change, the supports don't in this particular case. And this chart is for all of the participants overall. And some of these things change a little bit depending on where you fall in the spectrum, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So now we're going to spend some time talking a little bit about what we're calling these 5 personas. So we took people's CD risk scores and figured out here's what the mean is, and then did the statistical stuff with standard deviations, and came up with 5 categories that we're calling really imaginatively, lowest, low, average, high, and highest. We didn't want to give them animal names or something. People don't like that when we do that. And we were delighted to find that, in fact, our research fits pretty well into a bell curve. So you can see those lines. The bell curve is shown in black on there, and then those lines show how many people we have in those categories. So the majority of people fell into the average category. There are 630 people in that category, and then you can see high and low both had smaller chunks, and then highest and lowest have the smallest chunks of people. We're going to talk through 3 of those personas. So as we talk about these different personas, there's 2 things that I want you to do. Think about how these are actual people. These are actual words from an actual person who scored in the average range. And then the second thing is, as you learn more about the psychographics common to that group, think about how you can see that in the quotes that we use for each of them. The first one is average. So this is a quote from one of the people who scored in the average range. I can't say that I'm more resilient. I wish I could, but at times I actually feel more vulnerable. I'm critical of the stateside church and critical of myself. I hold myself to high standards and hold other Christians to that same standard. I think longevity in ministry comes from Christ. There have been times when I've turned to my husband and said, I'm done. But then, deep down, I hear that voice, feel his prodding, and know that he's not done with me yet here in this location. I know without a shadow of a doubt that God could do this work with other people. He doesn't really need us here. But for some reason, he's chosen to use us here, and here is where we need to be in order to better serve him and in order to grow closer to him. I think my ministry is that everyone God brings into my sphere of influence, nationals, other missionaries, often young, single women, children, visitors from supporting churches, etc. I want to and truly desire to be an example of Jesus' love wherever God places me. Knowing that God could do this without me, and yet chooses to use me, makes me feel honored and brings a sense of awe into my relationship with him. I was from a North American missionary to Central America for 15 years. So for people who scored in average, the most common stressors were conflict with coworkers was number 1, feeling overworked was number 2, cultural stress was number 3, financial pressures was number 4, and feeling inadequate was number 5. In terms of first coworkers is 2nd, local friendships is 3rd, support from home is 4th, and spiritual disciplines is 5th.
Chris, could you say something about those being the most popular?
Yeah, so when we say most popular, what we mean is the highest number of people ranked them in 1, 2, or 3. With each of the stressors and each of the supports, there were people in every category that chose those as part of their top 3. But the highest number of people chose family, coworkers, and local friendships as being in there. So the highest number of people chose family, the next highest number of people chose coworkers, and so on down the list. So it doesn't mean, it's really important that this stuff is not, you can't take a look at somebody and say like, oh, your favorite support is family, I bet you're an average. That's not how data works. So when it came to desired resources, the number 1, which this is another place we went in expecting like people are going to say like, oh, I need to know how to deal with culture shock. Oh, I need to know how to do fundraising. And the number 1 people, the number 1 thing that most people, the thing that was most popular is dealing with disappointment, grief, and loss. And I think if you were here yesterday and thinking about the stresses that and the adversities that missionaries face, and think about how many of those involve those feelings of disappointment, of grief, and of loss. The next thing that missionaries said that they wanted was resources in stress management. And then that was followed by conflict management and team dynamics and maintaining spiritual disciplines. And then when it comes to the open-ended question that we asked, what else about yourself or your experience as a missionary would you like to share? This group was the most likely to have what we called the best of times, worst of times idea. So this is, I remember really clearly one person who wrote, "My time in Ethiopia was the most beautiful time of my life, and it was the most terrible time of my life." Right? So I see a lot of people not, like we all have lived in that tension of like, it's really good and it's really awful. And this average group is the most likely group to report those kinds of feelings, to see both sides of things in that way. They also were the most likely to mention specific support systems in their answers, to mention self-care, grief, and conflict with nationals. They are less likely than low and lowest to mention stress, but they're more likely than high or higher, or highest to mention stress. And they also are kind of right there in the middle in terms of mentioning their relationship with God or their trust in God as key to being in the field. So this is our quote from someone who scored in the lowest category. "Currently, I feel like I am in a stage of brokenness, waiting for God to put the pieces back together. Generally, over the last few years, I've been very hurt and disappointed by nationals where I'm living. When I first came to this country, I was very excited and motivated to be used by God to impact the lives of my students and others I was encountering. I was passionate about the discipleship ministry I came to be a part of. I believed in it and its impact. However, many changes have occurred. After serious issues began, I endured a whole nother year, suffering all the way. I did it because it's what I came here committed to do. I did it because people back home expected it. I did it because I had students that I cared about and I wanted to do my best to give them what they deserved, even if others were not and were making it difficult for me to do so. But it was hard." From a North American missionary to East Africa for 6 years. So as we look at people who scored in the lowest category, we're going to look especially at the ways in which they are different from the average group. So that's where the little stars are. So first of all, their most popular stressor was actually feeling inadequate. Rather than being an external conflict with people, it was the way that they themselves felt. The second for them was financial pressure. And the third was unrealized goals. Then, in terms of their most popular supports, this is also another place where there's an interesting difference for the lowest people. Do you see what it is? What's their third support? The internet. Yeah. So again, I don't know entirely what that means, but it's really interesting to me that for the people who are scoring the lowest in resiliency, one of their top 3 supports is a non-relational.
Most popular.
One of
Most
their
popular.
most popular.
Something that could be related to that is that maybe that category are people who haven't fully left their home country and fully engaged where they're working. They're still spending so much time connecting to their home country.
Yeah, I think it's hard to say, even just from this data, why exactly that is, because there are a lot of factors there, I think. And we want to be really careful again to not say like, oh, I see this person is on Facebook all the time, they must not be very resilient. Or say to people, well, you can't get online and do things with velvet ashes because that's something that people who are not resilient do. In terms of their most popular desired resources, the number 1 was stress management, the number 2 was disappointment, grief, and loss, and the number 3 was burnout. The people scoring in the lowest category are the only ones to list burnout in their top 3 desired resources. So I think that it's safe to say that people who are scoring in the lowest category know that they're in the lowest category and that they have some needs related to that. With the write-in questions, people who scored in the lowest category were twice as likely as other groups to use a negative perspective and to talk about their expectations or their identity. They were more likely, along with people in the low group, to describe specific stressors in that question. And they showed high levels of stress, insufficient support, and awareness that the stress they were undergoing was having long-term effects on their health and their well-being. They were less likely to share protective factors like interpersonal support systems, spiritual supports, and supportive personal characteristics like commitment and gratitude. This is our quote from somebody who scored in the highest category. My life has been changed in the last 3 decades as I accept and surrender myself to the work ministry that is before me. I feel much closer and connected to others within the church and outside of the church. I understand a bit better the interconnection between people as His creation to each other and ultimately to Him. Trust in His ultimate control and goodness and surrender to Him because of trust are 2 things that have been affected in my life. I continue to see Him as all-holy, all-powerful Lord who is everywhere present, but also understand that He's fully present in the neighbor, the friend, the spouse, and the child that's before me. I love the imagery of the broken vessel put together with gold, as that is what life feels like. Every challenge, whether it be cancer, illness, death, civil war, or hardship, is the brokenness. His grace and love is the gold holding me together so that I can offer myself back to Him in some small manner to do His will and build His church. It's from a North American missionary to Southern Europe for 15 years. For people who scored in the highest, this is another place that's interesting to me. The popular stressors are different for them. So number 1 is financial pressure, which, if you remember, goes back to Bosch's research. That was the highest in Bosch's research. And language barriers, which I was really interested to see language barriers and cultural stress on that list, because I thought, oh, people who are the highest, they're probably like fluent in the language and they know what they're doing. And no, like those are, you can be resilient. They were the one category that put local friendships as their number 1 support. And I think that's something that's interesting to pay attention to. And thirdly, their family. In terms of what resources they wanted, the number 1 was maintaining spiritual disciplines. Number 2 was leadership. And number 3 and 4 were conflict management and stress management. And then finally, team dynamics. So there definitely are some themes there that we're seeing showing up in a lot of them, but those first 2 are unique to this group. In the open-ended question, there was not a single person who answered the open-ended question who either mentioned stress or had a negative perspective. The most frequent answers were things having to do with their relationship with God and their trust in God as being key, having a positive perspective, and both of those things showed up at over twice the rate that they showed up in other groups. Every single answer mentioned God and or spiritual support of some kind. And they were the most likely group to mention helpful personal traits such as flexibility, interpersonal skills. So at your table, you're going to get together and we're going to have you move to the area that you're most interested in. We're going to hand out a sheet with the information about the people in that category, of persona of those people, and on the back of it, there's going to be a written persona describing somebody who might be in that category, and then there are going to be some questions that you're going to answer as a small group, and then we're going to talk about in the larger group. We'll take 20 minutes to do that small group